The Long Road by Wolfland. By the time Stephen had made his way through the first few slabs, his back ached, and his hands were sore and cramped. He had no idea how long he'd been working, but as he chipped his way into the last two fossils of the slab before him, he felt sand trickle down on his head from the ceiling above. As he spared a moment to glance upward, a low rumble pulsed through the room, followed by a rising hiss. Stephen's head jerked upward in alarm, just in time to see the sand sink away from the slab at the rear of the chamber. Its balance compromised, the slab toppled backwards into the foundation wall with a thunderous crash. Stephen felt his chest clench as he watched the slab's fossil contents shatter into unrecognizable fragments across the chamber floor. Weakened by the blow, cracks splintered across the ceiling of the chamber, causing rivulets of sand to rain down from above, and Stephen knew he was out of time. Feeling a tug on his pant leg, he glanced down to see Auron looking expectantly up at him, barking in earnest. "I know! Time to go!" But as he spoke, his eyes drifted up towards the exit, where he caught sight of Baltoy. It excitedly orbited around the fossil Beldam had clutched in its claw, reaching out with its arms to gently brush over the surface of the fossil, crooning a haunting melody. Over the rumbling, Stephen swore he could hear more voices join in from outside. With newfound determination, Stephen turned back to the two fossils in front of him. Ignoring Auron's desperate pleas, Stephen plunged back into his work. If he could just save one more. Even as the sand began to swirl at his feet, he remained locked in concentration as he chiseled around the delicate tendrils of the fossilized remains. He didn't notice Auron sprint from his side to fetch its teammate when the little steel type was unable to drag their trainer away on his own. He hardly heard Beldam's chattering cries as he chipped away at the stone holding the armored claw of the Pokemon that was fossilized alongside the first. Squinting through sweat and sand, Stephen shouted in triumph as the pair of fossils finally came free from their sandstone prison. However, his joy was short-lived as the room rolled sharply to the side as the far corner was swallowed up by the desert sand. Off balance, Stephen was tossed to the ground, and he watched helplessly as the fossil pair slipped from his grasp and slid away across the sandy surface. He was on his feet, scrambling after the fossils, before either Auron or Beldam could stop him. With a diving lunge, Stephen managed to land on top of the rogue fossils, and he cradled the sample protectively in his arms. As he made to rise to rejoin his Pokemon, the ground shifted beneath his feet again, and he tumbled backward towards the churning sand at the edge of the sinking pit. Floor became ceiling, ceiling became floor, and for a brief, terror-stricken moment, Stephen swore he saw the flash of his life passing before his eyes. But as suddenly as he began to fall, Stephen jerked to a halt as something cool and solid tucked around his waist. Blinking through the sand, he craned upward and caught sight of his savior. Beldam? A pair of red eyes stared down at him, and he quickly realized that the only thing preventing him and his partner from being dragged into the sinkhole was a blue foreleg wrapped around his midsection, and a second blue claw anchored into a slab of sandstone that jutted out overhead. You evolved! A loud growl sounded from somewhere out of view, and Matang's metallic cry echoed across the chamber in reply. Slowly, the slab they were clinging to began to slide back away from the sinking sand, and the pair was lifted to safety. As they cleared the edge of the sinkhole, Stephen saw Auron tugging the slab in its jaws, while Baltoy pulled backward on Auron's body with its psychic powers. But the desert would not be thwarted so easily, and by now, the chamber had sunk enough that large sections of ceiling began to break free and rain down in deadly chunks. Pausing only a moment to allow Aron and Baltoy to hop onto its head, Matang swiftly shot across the chamber towards the exit. Too busy dodging the falling debris, Matang's gaze only snapped ahead when Baltoy rattled in alarm. The entry stair had begun to collapse on itself, and the opening was rapidly growing too small for them to pass through. Still hurtling forward at top speed, there was no way for Matang to avoid the impending collision. Throwing one claw up to protect its passengers, Matang cried out in warning. Steven felt his Pokemon's leg tighten across his midsection, and he closed his eyes, knuckles white, as he clasped the hapless pair of fossilized Pokemon to his chest. But the painful collision of stone and steel never came. Prying his eyes open, Steven was greeted with the sight of bright desert sunlight, tinted blue through the encompassing barrier of Aron's Protect. Free from the sinking temple, Matang slowed to a halt, and Aron's shield faded out as it collapsed onto its stomach in exhaustion. Finally released from his partner's grasp onto the sand, Steven let out the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, and he shakily rose to his feet, resting a hand on Matang's cool hide for support. The group turned their collective gaze back to the building they had just escaped, to find only the tallest peak of the roof still poking out above the desert floor. That had been a very close call. Drawing another slow breath, Steven tried to calm his racing heart when a chorus of rattles sounded from behind. As he turned back around, the crowd of Baltoy had assembled themselves once again, forming a semicircle around their leader. Many of the Pokemon clutched one of the rescued fossil samples above their heads, and Steven finally remembered that he still held one more pair of the fossils in his arms. Quickly kneeling down, he relinquished his grip on the slab and presented it to the Baltoy. "Here, these are the last two." He bowed his head, and the breath hitched in his throat. "I'm sorry I wasn't able to save more of them." When the weight of the stone was not lifted from his hands, Steven looked up in surprise. The lone Baltoy had shuffled in close and was silently staring up at him. Steven found himself only able to stare back until he felt a cool, earthen touch across his fingers. The Baltoy was still gazing up at him, but it eagerly pushed back against the proffered fossils. Steven blinked in confusion. "I can't keep these, Baltoy. It wouldn't be right to separate them from the others." But the little clay doll was adamant, and it shoved the fossils back into Steven's arms with a final push, and quickly tottered backward to its waiting kin, waving its arms happily about. Remaining on one knee, Steven lowered his gaze to the fossilized Pokemon in his hands. The two prehistoric creatures seemed to be locked in some sort of embrace, frozen in a tangled mess of feathery tendrils and armored plates. He slowly brushed a thumb over their delicate features, and his heart began to race again, this time with excitement. There was no doubt that a fossil of this quality could be resurrected in his father's lab. A short huff brought Steven's attention back to the present, and the weary Aron at his side tilted its head towards where the Baltoy had already begun to take their leave. Jumping to his feet, Steven called enthusiastically at the receding colony. "Baltoy! Thank you! I'll look after these two! It's a promise!" A collective rattle swept across the desert in reply. Steven's arm fell back to his side as the last of the Baltoy began to disappear from view. It was only after Matang hummed a quiet question that Steven's expression faltered. With a frantic wave, he shouted across the sand, "Hey, wait! How do we get home?" A haunting chorus of Baltoy cries drifted across the wind, and Steven felt the prickle of their psychic answer form at the back of his mind. Matang rattled a cry of its own in return, and Steven turned his gaze to his partner. "Are you psychic types always this mysterious?" Aron barked with laughter, and Matang's eyes narrowed, unamused. Before his now-evolved starter could try out any of its newly learned moves on its partner, Steven intervened with a grateful rub of both Pokemon's heads. You guys were great today! I couldn't have saved that many of Baltoy's friends without your help. Metang, your new form is incredible! I can't wait to see how much stronger you'll become! And after all that, we've got 2 new teammates too! Both Pokemon murmured happily as Steven rose, patting his pockets thoughtfully before withdrawing his father's map. As the wind began to pick up, Steven slid a small pencil from his pocket and scribbled a few words next to the northernmost red circle. Satisfied, Steven nodded as he donned his bandana and called to his partners. Let's head home! Hefting the fossil slabs in his arms, Steven set off towards the western horizon. Neatly folded in his pocket sat the map, ready to be returned to his father's files. Site has been thoroughly explored. No discoveries to report. Mark site as abandoned. Although wild Pokemon can be elusive, it's been theorized that sometimes they may choose to reveal themselves in order to communicate with humans. As a trainer, it is important to be attentive to the Pokemon you encounter in the wild. You never know what they could be trying to tell us.